Hi there, welcome back. Today we're out on the snow, clearly. So we're going to be taking a look at snow equipment. And in this case, we're going to be looking at a really popular piece of snow equipment, the ice axe. Now, a little bit about the word ice axe. So here in North America, when we say ice axe, we're talking about a piece of equipment that has a blade, or what's actually called the pick of the axe, that drops down slightly and is primarily designed for self-arrest. In the UK and a lot of other English-speaking countries, if they say ice axe, they could be talking about a tool that's designed for self-arrest, or they could say something like technical ice axe, or they might have two ice axes. And typically if they have two ice axes, or if they say technical ice axe, they're talking about a tool that's designed for climbing steep snow or ice. Today we're only talking about tools for self-arrest. So I have two different types of ice axes with me today. I have a sort of a standard snow travel axe. This is more designed for ski mountaineering. It's short, has a lightweight aluminum shaft, but it still has a steel head, so this still works well for mountaineering in the summertime here in the Pacific Northwest, as long as there's not pitches of really steep hard snow or ice. And then we have a modular ice axe. This is a Petzl axe, by the way. And then this is a black diamond axe. And this modular axe, it also has a head or a pick. This is the pick portion that's designed for self-arrest. It slopes downward, but you can swap that pick out with a different pick to make it more suitable for climbing really steep hard snow or ice. And the type of material that this particular pick is made out of makes it a little bit better for climbing steep. You'll also notice that this axe has a pinky rest, and that pinky rest on a modular axe like this can be slid up or down. And by sliding it up or down, it allows you to use different grips on that axe. So sliding it down to the bottom allows you to swing the axe into pied-à-encre position, or we could just say using it more like an ice tool. And sliding it up toward the top keeps it out of the way in the event you want to plunge the axe vertically, which in soft snow can give you better purchase, reduce the likelihood of a slip becoming a fall, and also allows you to use it more easily as a vertically placed anchor for really small loads or simply to anchor yourself. We're going to go through the parts of an ice axe right now, and I'll simply use this axe to do that. So we'll start at the very top. So this large portion up here is called the head of the ice axe, the ice axe head. The ice axe head includes the tool on the back of the axe. In this case, there's an adze tool. It includes an eye here that's designed for a carabiner to lock on there, and it includes the pick. So this entire portion is called the head. This modular head has a screw here or a bolt that can be taken out to change this pick, whether you wanted to have a technical pick or more of a snow travel pick. And on the head, we have the pick, which I talked about. That could be a downward shaped pick or a straight pick, or even sometimes a little bit of an upward curve with it, which would make it better for technical climbing, but not as good for self-arrest. And then we have the tool, which would either be an adze tool, which is sort of that triangular shape right there. Adze tool is designed for digging in snow or chopping away at hard snow like neve or ice, usually an anchor construction or we're building stances. Okay, so those are the components of the head. And then we have the shaft of the ice axe. This shaft has a slight curve to it. One of the advantages of a curved shaft is when the tool is placed in hard snow, it leaves some clearance here. So you can see I easily can have my hand underneath. So in the event that I'm climbing something steep, if I'm using sort of a dagger position here or here, whether it's high dagger or low dagger, especially in low dagger here, I'm not gonna bash my knuckles into the hard ice, right? Same thing is true if I'm using this in the pied-à-encre position or sort of the swinging ice tool position. I'm not going to bash my knuckles into the ice as much because the pinky guard will stop that from happening. So we have the shaft, and then some ice axes, but not all, will have the grip. Grips sound kind of like what they are. It simply provides a little bit more security in your grip by increasing friction. So this is made out of rubber, which is good for friction on the palm of your glove, but it also increases the insulation of the axe, so your hands aren't going to get as cold. And then down here on the end, this, sometimes people call this the pick, but this is called the spike of the ice axe. And I like a really sharp spike. Not all axes will have a sharp spike, especially ultralight axes. They may not have a spike at all because they're designed typically for winter travel where you don't have a lot of hard snow or ice around. But having a spike allows you to get a little bit of purchase in hard snow. Not a lot in ice. If it's true ice, it's not going to give you tons, but it's better than nothing sometimes. And then a lot of spikes, but not all, will have a hole in the very bottom. Okay, so one more time, we have the head of the axe, which includes the adze tool for most snow travel axes, and the pick of the axe. We have the shaft of the axe, the grip of the axe, and the spike on the axe. So those are the parts of an ice axe. So now I'll talk a little bit about how to hold the axe. So when I'm walking uphill, I tend to have the pick pointing forward. Okay? The reason that I tend to have the pick pointing forward when I'm uphill is because the slope coming here is very close, and if I fall forward, I can easily and quickly plunge the pick of the axe into the slope. Now, something you should know is a lot of these ice axe techniques were invented in Europe, and Europeans still have a lot of influence on the techniques that we tend to use. So that particular technique of plunging the pick of the axe in this con position, or the cane position, was passed down from mountain guides into the United States. So you'll find it really common for mountain guides in the United States to use the pick forward position when traveling uphill. You may see for recreational climbers who oftentimes have been more influenced by American organizations like the Mountaineers and the Mazamas and other nonprofits, it may be more common when walking uphill to have the adze tool forward and the pick backwards. And that allows going into self-arrest position to be a little bit easier while holding a strong grip on your axe. One of the other things about that is the mode of travel used. A lot of times guides are using short roping where there's very minimal rope between climbers and therefore minimal slack, and the loads aren't as great. And so falling forward and using positioning alone rather than true self-arrest is generally enough to hold the force of a fall for a small team with minimal rope out. Versus with lots of rope out, especially with a larger team and multiple climbers, if multiple people fall, then position alone with the pick forward may not be enough, and you may need true self-arrest position. So just know that there's a difference between culture of organizations and the history of those techniques. Okay? When walking downhill, the slope is behind me, and then I'll typically position the ice axe with the adze tool forward and the pick backwards. Okay? For the same reason, if I slip and fall, then my pick goes into the slope relatively quickly and easily, and then I will swing myself over into self-arrest position, get my hips well up off of the snow, and kick my feet in. Oftentimes I'll kick my feet in even if I have crampons on, if it's really dire, like there's a crevasse below, it's a steep slope, there's other dangers and hazards. Okay? And I'll talk more about that later when we get into self-arrest. Another interesting thing that has a lot to do with the culture of the organization or the people that you're being trained in is whether or not to use a tether, and if you do use a tether, what type of tether to use. So here in the Pacific Northwest, I very rarely use a tether when I'm guiding on moderate terrain. So that would be a typical glacier route like the Coleman-Deming on Mount Baker, for example. And a lot of that just comes down to personal preference and simplicity. By not having a tether, it allows me to switch hands back and forth with the ice axe quite easily and efficiently, and it allows me to pivot the ice axe easily if I fall forward and I decide I need to go into true self-arrest. If the forces are really high and my position alone isn't holding, I can pivot the axe this way without encountering something attached between me and the axe that could get tangled up. However, if I'm in really steep, icy terrain that would be very dangerous, difficult, or nearly impossible to descend without an ice axe, then not having my ice axe attached to my body might not be advisable, because that could be really dangerous for me as well as all of my guests who I've brought out. So in those circumstances, I would probably decide to use a tether. Lots of different types of tethers you can use. There are advantages and disadvantages to having tethers that are fully rated for constructing anchors. One of the advantages, obviously, is you can easily use that tether for constructing an anchor. One of the disadvantages is a lot of times anchors that are, or tethers that are fully rated, you may have used a double length runner and they can get caught up on crampons and things and increase the likelihood of a trip, slip, and fall on the same icy slopes that you're afraid of dropping your axe on. So whatever you decide, you want to make sure that you're not increasing your risk of falling by incorporating a tether, whether that's full runner strength or not. This one is not a full runner strength runner. It's just made by Gravel. It has a pivot on a locking carabiner on one side, and then you can girth hitch on the other side. So that's typically what I'll use if I decide I need to use a tether, and I'll simply attach other materials into my axe if I decide that I need to use my axe as an anchor. Typically, I'm not actually attaching the materials here, which is where I would attach my tether. I would attach those materials down here through the hole that's on the pick of the axe, so that if it's placed in this position, I have pull coming from this direction here. Okay, there are other different types of anchors where I may clip a carabiner through the top, but I still typically don't end up using my tether. I have other materials on my anchor for that. Okay, so those are just a few considerations of your axe. And then the final one I wanted to talk about is what length of ice axe you should buy. So different organizations, again, they have different cultures and they have different requirements or different suggestions for the ice axe length that you should purchase. In general, what I find is the best ice axe length for you depends on what type of climbing you're doing. So for me, as a guide, I feel very comfortable walking on low angle terrain, and the primary use of my axe in that case is not as a walking stick. It's not for my personal balance because it's low angle, so I don't need the balance. It's more for self-arrest. However, when I get up onto steep terrain, then it becomes more important that I don't lose my balance, because losing my balance could result in a slip, trip, and fall. And on steep terrain, if I have a really long axe, then I end up kind of in this position here because the slope is so steep in front of me. My shoulder is then not in a very strong position, nor is my elbow, and it makes holding a fall more difficult. So as a guide, not being concerned about balance in low angle terrain, but being more concerned about balance when the terrain is steep, I typically carry a shorter axe. There's two more advantages of having a short axe. One advantage is it's lighter. That's an obvious advantage. And then the other advantage is if I'm climbing technical rock or pitches of ice and I'm coming up into a belay with a small stance where my guests are going to be really close to me, if I have a long axe and it's attached to the outside of my pack, as I turn around in that stance, I can poke my guests. And in really bad situations, you could gouge someone in the eye. Hopefully they have some sort of eye protection on. So having a small axe allows you to put a pick protector on and actually put the axe inside your backpack so it doesn't snag on rocks. And even more importantly, when you're at a small stance in alpine terrain, you're not going to poke and prod your guests with this sharp tool. So that's typically what I'll use. Again, personal preference. If you think that you're only going to be on low angle glaciers and you're not going to be doing any technical climbing, then having a longer axe is nice because a longer axe can serve as balance in lower angle terrain. If you're not going to be encountering any steep terrain, then that's really ideal. Typically, I'll bring my ice axe and I'll have one trekking pole, and I'll use my trekking pole in the low angle terrain. If I need self-arrest, I don't have my hand through the wrist loop of the pole, and I just fall into self-arrest with the axe and I drop the pole. It's very unusual for me to need to do self-arrest on the low angle terrain when I'm guiding, and so it's worth to me the possibility of dropping my pole for the security and comfort that the pole gives me on the uphill and the downhill for my knees. And then I simply put my pole in my backpack or attached to my backpack, and I have my short axe free for the pitches where it really matters that I keep my balance and can keep the security, the team secured with the use and proper use of my axe.